Welcome to the Snowbird's Expat Radio Podcast, powered by the Snowbird US Day Tracker app. I'm your host, Gerry Scott, and my goal is to give you answers to your cross-border questions, to ease the stress of a cross-border move or extended trip, and to keep you up to date on all you need to know with cross-border rules and regulations. Now let's get on with the show. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Gerry Scott from the Snowbird's Expat Radio Podcast. Today I have my guest, Robert Clegg, a returning guest, almost becoming a co-host. So welcome to that status, Robert. Today we're going to be talking about, we've got so many Canadians that are looking for ways to spend more time in the States. Today we're not going to be talking about the E2 visa, which is an investment visa. We're going to be talking about these other things. So, Robert, I'm in Qualicum Beach today. I know you're in Victoria. We're in the same time zone, but I know others are going to be in a different time zone. So let's get right into these questions. So once again, we're talking about Canadians that want to spend more time in the United States, either opportunities that lead to citizenship or doesn't, but whatever the reasons, they want to spend more time in more time in the United States, but we know there's rules around how much time a Canadian can spend in the U.S. So I'm going to go right into the questions. Let's say, for example, so how does it work? An adult, they're trying to acquire a U.S. citizenship. What conditions must they meet?
For adults, it's a little bit different from children under the age of 18. And it really, you have to analyze each individual's fact pattern. And the first question is, you have to determine which year, right? Birth date. When was the person born? Because, just like Canadian immigration, so I've heard, U.S. immigration rules have changed over the years, right? We've had Immigration Acts 1932, 1948, in the 60s and the 80s. Additional rules came about in 2000, etc., specifically to acquisition or U.S. citizenship status for individuals born outside of the United States. So we really have to look first to see what year and which set of statutes would apply. And then we look at their age. If they're under 18 and born after 1986, born abroad to either one or two U.S. citizen parents, then we have to determine citizenship for each parent and time spent in the United States, right? So it's a rather complex set of statutes. Other wrinkles include whether the child was born out of wedlock, in wedlock. Who is the U.S. citizen parent? Was it the father? Was it the mother? Right. So what we can do is analyze that, see which set of statutes apply, see if either the U.S. citizen mother or father meets residency requirements. And I'll give you an example. Say the child was born after 1986 in Canada to a U.S. citizen mother and a non-U.S. citizen father, say a Canadian father. In order for the mother, who's the U.S. citizen, to transfer her citizenship to her child, who is over the age of 18, that the mother would have had to been physically present in the United States at least 5 years prior to the birth of the child, right? 2 of which must be after the age of 14. So what we do is we look, determine, gather primary and also secondary evidence, primary being for example, birth records, school attendance records, transcripts, etc. Secondary being affidavits from individuals that can attest that that person was actually living in this place during this set of dates. Once that is gathered, then a U.S. passport application can be prepared, and then the applicant, along with the parent, can schedule an appointment. And the appointments are done relatively quick, as opposed to like renunciations. And then you'll sit down with a reviewing officer at the consulate. They'll go through the paperwork and then make a determination right then and there. If the application is approved, then it's forwarded for completion, and the person will get a U.S. passport freshly minted in about a month, right? And then that person, going forward and even retroactively, will be considered a U.S. person.
Now,
And then they would be entitled to reside permanently in the United States in any state. They can work, they can live. There is no limit to how long they can stay in the U.S.
now, has it become more difficult under the current administration? Hate to make things political, but we have to these days.
I wouldn't, not for citizenship acquisitions, in my opinion, as long as it's well documented and substantiated. And I mean, the actual application itself, I can't say it'll sail through, but I think it would have a higher likelihood of success, right? There are cases where perhaps the mother to the applicant received derivative citizenship herself, right? Or the father, for that matter, may be born in Canada, received derivative citizenship through the grandmother, but lives in Canada, right? So we have to determine, okay, did the applicant's mother actually at any time meet that 5-year, 2 of which needs to be over the age of 14 requirement for someone that's born after 1986? If you can't, then the application will go nowhere, and you can't substantiate the time required under the statute. But if you can, then the applicant would be successful, right? And again, it really depends on when the client was born, right? Rules back in the 1930s were much different than today. In 2020, I believe, got a cheat sheet here, which I can't really see, but if your child is under the age of 18, and say the parent never lived in the United States, but the grandparent did, we can use days from the grandparent to top up and meet the residency requirements. So again, when people call me, I sit down, consult with them, and we go over the facts, right? First, if it looks like, the parent or parents in this matter meet the requirement to transfer citizenship, then we'll proceed. If it looks questionable, we can proceed, but we just have to dig further for either primary or secondary evidence in which to support the application.
Now, what happens if there's no family ties to the United States whatsoever, and you have a sponsoring employer that wants to transfer this Canadian employee to the U.S. operations? Is that more difficult?
I wouldn't say it's more difficult. I think that would probably be simpler. It can be an intercompany transfer, L1A type situation. L1B, there's, for lack of a better word, the rocket scientist visas, right? Somewhat of national security caliber. With respect to, say, an L1B visa, it's considered what's called a dual status. So when you meet a certain time under that visa, resident in the United States, your employer can further sponsor you for permanent residence. And once you receive permanent residence, then you can self-petition after a period of 5 years for U.S. citizenship. So, there's various avenues towards obtaining U.S. citizenship. One obvious, and that's the focus of this podcast, would be citizenship through a parent, right? And in particular, I see it often with folks that are over the age of 18. They have 2 U.S. citizen parents. They were born in Canada. First question is, can I get a U.S. passport? And the question is, let's have a look further, dig down, and gather the facts, and then we can conclude whether or not an application is warranted.
Now, if you were able to get that person that status where they can move down to the States, would they have to give up their Canadian citizenship?
Not at all. No, both the United States and Canada allow for dual citizenship. So you won't lose either, right? But one thing that Canadians that have been, they're Canadian first and then say they obtain a U.S. passport, is once they become U.S. persons, through their birth abroad to a U.S. parent, they have been citizens since birth, right? Which comes with U.S. tax filing obligations. So what we typically do is if before we, jump into an application for a U.S. passport, we also need to see how they're structured here in Canada. Do they have trusts? Do they have corporations, PFICs, the whole nine yards, right? Because we don't want to set them up for a big tax bill upon obtaining a U.S. passport, right? So we need to plan both from an immigration U.S. as well as from a U.S. tax perspective. And don't forget, Canada also has a departure tax system in place. So if their plan is to move permanently, obtain a U.S. passport, move permanently to Hawaii, for example, or Palm Springs, or somewhere warm and not terribly rainy, we need to have a look, and we need to consider what they have in Canada that could trigger this deemed capital gain tax for Canadian tax purposes. So it's kind of on all sides that we have to really hunker down and look further into.
Do you find a lot of firms, this is where they kind of struggle? You've got the immigration people, you've got the taxation people. Do you find, at least we find this, that it looks great from an immigration perspective, but not very good from a tax perspective?
Well, exactly, because oftentimes immigration lawyers won't know much, if anything, about Canadian income tax, the departure tax mechanism, or even U.S. tax. Typically, they'll just refer right to someone they trust that can opine on it. In our situation, we can handle both the U.S. and the immigration side, right? Canadian tax, we can certainly consult, but we don't provide at this point any sort of compliance assistance, right? But we can certainly assist their Canadian tax professionals, right, with respect to that deemed disposition.
Now, I've now become a U.S. person. We found out my grandfather's father, or however far we went back, was a U.S. person. Now they allow Gerry and Melissa Scott to go down to the States. Robert's done all this fine work for them. How many years do I have to go back to file my U.S. tax returns?
Well, the good news is, and we've done this many, many times, the IRS has, for the lack of a better word, an amnesty. It's called the Streamlined Filing Procedures. And so you would only have to go back 3 years of income taxes and 6 years of the foreign bank account reports, along with a declaration, a signed certification or declaration attesting that your non-compliance was not the result of willful non-compliance. And in your case, in that particular case, it's pretty clear that one, the taxpayer had probably no idea they were eligible for U.S. citizenship until they actually discovered it, applied for it, and received it, right? So we've done many, many streamlines for folks that obtain derivative citizenship through a parent successfully. So never had any issues on that end. I think the IRS takes a relatively lenient approach when it comes to these filers.
How many times do people come to you saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I want to go down to the States. I want to spend more time there. I want to make them this United States my permanent residence. I'm tired of Canada. How often do you come across that once you provide all the facts and give them great advice, that they don't move forward with this situation?
I find it really depends on their age group. Younger professionals, right? Computer science, etc. Very gung-ho to move, right? So it's really one of the first questions. We're doing their U.S., they come and inquire about having U.S. taxes done. Question that we ask is, hey, tell us about your parents, right? Where are they from? Sometimes they're both from U.S. Maybe one is from the U.S. You'd be surprised at just how many Americans live here in Canada. There's a lot, right? And so rather than applying for a TN visa, an H-1B visa, or other, an investor type visa, they can go straight in if their facts fit. straight into U.S. citizenship. Once they obtain that citizenship, they can then move to the United States, obtain a social security number with no restrictions, right? And work for whomever they want in the United States and any of its territories. That includes Puerto Rico, Guam, Samoa, Virgin Islands, right? So, or Laos.
Yeah. Robert, it's very interesting. We got to spend more time on covering, and we've talked about this. There's so many aspects of Canadians going down south. There are Americans coming up here to Canada. But anyhow, Robert, I appreciate your time. I know we've got so much work we can do together on this immigration side of things, and we've talked about many more podcasts. So we look forward to it. I will allow you to get back to your afternoon. We appreciate your time. Very much. And if people need to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you? Outside of us sending us an email, we can forward you to Robert, which we do in many cases. How else can they get a hold of you?
They can give me a call here in Victoria. Yeah, you can provide them a call, or I could just tell them the number right here.
Go ahead, please do.
It's area code 778-356-2656.
That's wonderful.
Yep.
Well, Robert, once again, thank you for your time, and we'll let you get back to your busy day. And I'm sure we'll be speaking over the next couple of days as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Gerry. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you again for listening to the Snowbird Expat Radio Podcast. The best way you can support the podcast is to forward the episode to a friend, and please don't hesitate to like, subscribe, or leave a comment. Now, before you go, let me leave you with one of my favorite quotes. Be kind to all, the world is small.